those listening via Radio Anguilla, those listening online via government.gov.ai in Anguilla and Lloyd's Live. Let me issue a profound apology for the very late start. It was due to myself and the PS being at meetings. We literally had to dash from meetings to get here. So we do sincerely apologize for that. It's just another day, so to speak, in the life of government. I would like to start with a word of prayer by asking God's presence upon this session here this evening, asking that He guide the thoughts and presentations that will follow, that He continues to provide protection over this island and to protect all our healthcare workers and those who are charged with the security of this nation, to the families who are grieving at this time, to the families who are coping with the effects of the COVID pandemic. We ask your prayers and blessings upon them. We ask these favors in your name. Amen. So good evening once again. I would like to welcome our faithful member of the audience, retired High Court Judge, Justice Don Mitchell, our listeners via Radio Anguilla and the viewers on gov.ai in Anguilla and Lloyd's Live. I begin, as I begin every evening, with the opening stanza of our national song. God bless Anguilla, nurture and keep her. Noble and beauteous, she stands amidst the sea. O land of the happy, a haven we'll make thee. Our lives and love we give unto thee. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this, the sixth in the series of town hall meetings that the Ministry of Home Affairs is organizing to solicit the views of the general public on constitutional reform. Tonight we are in District 6, Vallis Road South, broadcasting from the Maranatha Methodist Church in Blowing Point. We want to thank the Superintendent Minister, Reverend Celestine, and clergy for allowing us the use of this hallowed facility. In my remarks this evening, continuing in the vein of sharing the thoughts of past Chief Ministers of Anguilla on constitutional reform, it is quite fitting that I read out former Chief Minister's letter of 2006. Mr. Hubert Hughes, who is rightly recognized as one of the giants of Anguilla's political landscape, is best known for his strong anti-colonial views. As I previously said, I think it is important to have as part of the national record the views of the various leaders of Anguilla on constitutional reform. Mr. Hubert Hughes wrote South, 6 June 2006, to the Chairman of the Constitutional Committee, Dear Sir, I wish to thank you for the invitation to discuss your preamble to the Anguilla Constitutional Review on the 1st of June 2006, and thanks for supplying me with a copy to which I am requested to study and respond. I have now read the document, and from my standpoint, I find it very difficult to respond. Maybe that is because I have been so involved in serious and prolonged dialogue with Her Majesty's government and the other dependent territories in the period 1996 to 2000, when I headed the Anguilla delegation to all such meetings. If you may recall, sir, the letter from the Conservative Government Foreign Secretary, the Right Honorable Malcolm Rifkin, which came to me on the 17th of December, still haunts my considerations as to the scope of the Anguilla Commission, considering that the new Labour Government Foreign Secretary, the Right Honorable Robin Cook, who replaced Rifkin, was even more forthright in pursuing Her Majesty's government's new policy for her overseas territories. The essence of that new policy was based on two options which were open to the OTs. One, complete independence, or two, remaining dependent, with the consequence of remaining dependent being the surrender of much of the powers which were controlled by the locally elected officials, now to the British governors. You are also aware, sir, that I saw the genuinely national consensus on the Rifkin's proposals, and an appropriate reply was agreed upon setting out Anguilla's terms. I was sent after the Bermuda Conference, hastened by the Premier for the Caribbean Dependent Territories, and after reaching consensus there, I went off to London to present Anguilla's position, and I was accompanied by a legal assistant, Lawyer Josephine Gomes-Connor, from your chambers. Judging, therefore, from my record, you would understand why it is so difficult for me to follow what is happening on the constitutional review process at the present time. Let us not forget that having all the British overseas territories carrying on reviews of their respective constitutions is not by any means coincidental. Two critical questions must be borne in mind. First, what does Britain hope to get out of this exercise? And second, what should Anguilla get? If I am allowed to comment on these two critical questions, especially with the policy of Her Majesty's government before me, my only conclusion is that Her Majesty's government would want to increase its powers while reducing the powers held by our elected representatives. But in my view, Anguillians would want a higher degree of autonomy within the principle of constitutional advance. I am sure you have in your files a copy of the paper I delivered at the Dependent Territories Association Conference in London on the 4th of February 1998. If you would now refresh your mind on the main points set out in that speech, you would realize that many of those safeguards have been seriously breached since my expulsion from government in March 2000. As you would recall in that speech, great emphasis was placed on the fundamental issue of belongership. Let me give a brief quote. Belonger status or its equivalent has become a necessity for two reasons. One, it gives us the right to determine who are to belong, thus protecting our original identities. And two, it safeguards the constitutional, political, social, and economic goals that individuals set for themselves. At this point in time, I would make a simple plea that as chairman of this commission, you circulate copies of this 10-minute speech for study by the members of the commission. Having studied the 7-point plan in that speech, the job of the commission should be easy. Having read your preamble makes me feel concerned that we may be making the same error that was made in previous exercises of this matter by being influenced by only what certain interest groups desire to have, which they think might give them a special advantage. This approach has tended to give Her Majesty's government an opportunity to generally strengthen the powers of Her Majesty's government at the expense of Anguilla. I will therefore humbly reiterate that we use this opportunity to do the basic fundamentals to achieve constitutional advance by 1, adhering to the principles of the 7-point plan, 2, by safeguarding the rights of Anguillians as an indigenous or distinct people by restricting belongership, 3, by generally reducing the powers of the governor while increasing the power of the elected representatives. Judging by what I have said before in this paper and in my statements so far on radio, you should not be surprised or alarmed if I say I disagree with the criteria you set out in Section 13 of your preamble for increasing the number of elected members in the House from the present 7 to 13. Your justification that this big increase is necessitated by the desire to increase the number of ministers from the current number of 3 beside the Chief Minister to 5 besides the Chief Minister, Chief Minister Premier, cannot be borne when we examine what pertains in the Caribbean independent states. Think it, for instance, with a population over 3.5 times the size of Anguilla, and with a vastly larger economy, has only 8 elected members. And in the last government, when all 8 won their seats, there were 8 ministers. Nevis, with approximately the same population and economy as ours, has 5 elected members. I see no reason why the scaling of ministers in the Anguilla Constitution cannot be raised from the present 3 to 5 without burdening the budget with this disproportional number of 13 elected seats. I therefore suggest that the best formula for Anguilla to achieve the highest degree of democracy while maintaining administrative costs to financially acceptable levels is to 1, convert the 2 nominated seats into 2 extra elected seats. 2, to adopt the exact proportional representation system as in Montserrat, thus creating 1 constituency and doing away with a pass-the-post system. And 3, by maintaining the present situation of having the Deputy Governor and Attorney General to give their opinion in the House, but not to vote. In Section 34 again, I disagree with the suggestion that ambiguity exists in the present Constitution in case the Chief Minister vacates his office. To my mind, the spirit and letter of the no confidence motion, which was amended in the Constitution Order of 1990, dictates that the only option is new general elections with no discretion by the governor, other than to name the date within 2 months after dissolution for general elections. But I would have no problem with the suggested amendment as quoted, whether after a general election or at any time thereafter, if it shall become necessary. I would thus add that it is not democratic to maintain a 2/3 majority to effect a motion of no confidence, and I suggest that it be a simple majority. Paragraph 43, International Financial Services. Now that all the checks and balances have been put in place as in the BVI, this important portfolio should be returned to our local minister. Paragraph 46. I recommend that the tenure of office of the PSC be not less than 5 years, and that both the governing party and the elected opposition have equal say in the selecting of some of its members, while staff associations select the rest, and PSC there refers to the Public Service Commission. Judging from past experience, there needs to be much greater checks and balances than exist in the present Constitution to ensure the dignity and impartiality of the chair. At the present time, the Speaker is chosen by the party which wins the election, and it is quite obvious that the Speaker is politically biased. This is the time to ensure that that position is not filled on a party political basis. To do that, the governing party and the opposition should agree on the appointment of the Speaker. Paragraph 54, Attorney General. The AG, if not an elected member, must be appointed on the advice of the Premier or Chief Minister. In the past, Anguilla's AGs owed their allegiance to the governor, and my personal experience testifies to this. The Anguilla taxpayer bears the cost of an AG, and who pays the piper should call the tune. Paragraph 64, Section 37. Under the present Constitution, the Elections Ordinance is not clearly defined. The question of domicile is ambiguous, and the criteria for qualification for contesting elections should first of all be a person one of whose parents was born in Anguilla and was resident here at the time of registration of voters. But no person shall be put on the voters' list who was not resident in Anguilla at the time of registration, and was ordinarily resident no less than 6 months prior to registration. Nevertheless, I would concur with the idea that either Anguillians who do not have to come to Anguilla to vote as they do now for a trip to Anguilla and a rental car on arrival, and instead, if they are on the voters list in Anguilla, they may vote wherever they live, and also there is a residential criteria to vote in Anguilla. I would have no problem with continuous registration. Civil servants should not be officers in the electoral process. Wherever practical, retired ministers or functioning ministers of religion should be used. A quorum should be half of the members or less than half of the members. The quorum should never again be used to prevent the business of the people from being transacted, and only in the House can a quorum be decided. Hubert Hughes, Road South, 6 June 2006. Viewers and listeners, constitutional reform is a national exercise. And I am heartened that by the fact that in addition to members of the public who have been leaving comments on Facebook and other social media platforms, we are also increasingly receiving comments sent in by email. Also, we have been receiving requests from various groups to have sessions with them. Example, APNI and the Anguilla National Youth Council. The more participation and engagement, the better. Overall, I do sincerely hope that you have been finding these town hall meetings informative and enlightening. While we have been somewhat hampered by the need to adhere to the COVID-19 health protocols, attendance in person has been increasing. And from day one, there has been extensive viewership on the online platforms, Facebook, YouTube, etc. We have also been on Radio Anguilla, Class FM, and Cool FM. I am pleased that my ministry has been able to once again team up with the Department of Information Technology, DITES, and Mr. Gilbert Gaff Fleming of Titanium Sounds and in Anguilla to provide excellent audio, visual, and streaming for this meeting and the other meetings to come. With all the above I now invite Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Home Affairs, Dr. Aidan Harrigan.
Good evening to one and all. Okay, good evening again. Apologies for the break. So as we know, sometimes we are at the mercy of modern technology. Right. So for those of you who may have been listening, tuned in to past sessions, or would have been listening to us on the various radio stations, you know that part of important part of constitutional development is self-determination, and the United Nations, by way of its charter, declares that all peoples have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely determine their economic, social, and cultural development. The United Nations in 1946, by Resolution 661, established a list of non-self-governing territories. And in 1960, the UN, by way of Resolution 1541, Roman numeral 10.5, identified that self-determination can be attained through three modes: independence, free association, and integration. The UN in 1961 also established a special committee on decolonization, the so-called Committee of 24. And the UK, like other administering powers, are obligated to report on an annual basis to the UN on the progress of its non-self-governing territories attaining self-determination. The UN declared its first international decade on decolonization from 1991 to 2000 with the intention that all the non-self-governing territories would be removed from the list by that end of that period. However, fast forward to the current decade, 2021, and there still remain a number of non-self-governing territories, 17 to be exact, of which Anguilla is one. So in terms of the modes of self-determination, independence, so as we know, a country gains independence if it has its own government and is not ruled by any other state or country. And there are a number of former colonies in the Caribbean which are now independent. Free association is defined as a result of a free and voluntary choice by the peoples of the territory concerned, expressed through informed and democratic processes, and should permit the right to determine the internal constitution without outside interference. An example of that in the Caribbean is Puerto Rico and its relationship with the United States of America. Integration is defined that it should be on the basis of complete equality between the people of the former territory and the country into which it is being integrated. Examples in the Caribbean are Martinique and Guadeloupe and their relationship with France. Taking a quick whip through Anguilla's history, Anguilla was established as a British colony in 1650, and it would administer through Antigua. However, in 1825, administrative control was switched to St. Kitts. In 1967, following the collapse of the West Indies Federation, the UK established the associated state of St. Kitts, Nevis, and Anguilla, with a constitution that represented, or it was seen as a semi-independent status for the tri-state. As we know, and here in Anguilla, we did not agree with that move, and there was protests. And for example, there was the disruption of the statehood Queen show, and then the Kittitian policemen who were stationed in Anguilla, they were sent off the island, and what we now celebrate on an annual basis as Anguilla Day, May 30th. was an important date in that whole development. Subsequent to that, by way of a referendum in July 1967, Anguillans decided to secede from the tri-state, and a constitution adopted by Roger Fisher was adopted. There was a second independence referendum there was a second referendum in February 6, 1969, and Anguilla was declared as a independent republic and adopted a constitution formulated by another U.S. citizen, Jack Holcomb. The UK responded in March 1969, deploying troops to Anguilla, and direct rule was established from Britain and by edict through the Anguilla Act of 1971. Subsequent to that, there was a 1976 Constitution which provided for ministerial government. Then in 1980, by way of the Anguilla Act, the UK formally approved the separation of Anguilla from St. Kitts Nevis Anguilla, and this happened on December 19th, 1980. The constitution currently in effect in the main is the Constitutional Order of 1982. It was amended in 1980 and further amended in 2019. So it's taken a long time for us to even get to the point of changing the existing constitution. Okay, attempts at constitutional reform. If you would have listened to the letter that the Minister Hodge read from Chief Minister Hughes, you would know that an important point was at the end of 1999, early 2000s, when the UK changed adopted a new policy as regards their territories, which was called the Partnership for Progress and Prosperity. The territories were renamed from dependent territories to overseas territories, and they were encouraged to set up constitutional reform with commissions or committees and make proposals to the UK government for constitutional change. The UK government was quite clear to indicate that for those territories that wish to become independent, they could do so once it was the clearly expressed wish of the majority of the people. However, it ruled out free association or integration with the UK. In 2001, a constitutional committee was established, and however, despite a number of meetings and hearings and public consultations and awareness, no formal recommendations were ever adopted. And another important point was in 2003, where the UN decolonization seminar was held in Anguilla, and the first time that it was held in a British overseas territory. And the UN Secretary General, in the letter to that seminar, would have indicated that achieving self-government for the peoples of the world has been one of the cardinal goals of the United Nations since its inception. Fast forward into 2006, another constitutional committee reform committee was established, and they would have done their work and submitted a report within 6 months. However, nothing came of it. And then in 2015, another attempt was made, and after 2 years of extensive work, in 2017, the committee would have tabled a report and also a draft constitution for consideration. So what was the driving factor behind that reform effort of 2015 to 2017? Can be argued that looking at the Anguilla's constitution, it could be referred to as a constitutional dictatorship, in that the UK has always retained a number of reserve powers exercised either by the governor or the UK Secretary of State. And based on the feedback from the general public, they would have identified that they wish to see an improvement in democracy in terms of the framework, the constitutional framework, and also to improve the standards in public life. So taking a look at the various sections of the Constitution, we have, for example, in the preamble, which states in part, whereas the people of the territory of Anguilla have over centuries evolved with distinct cultural identity and will, which is the essence of an Anguillan, and acknowledging that the society of Anguilla is based on certain moral, spiritual, and democratic values, including the belief in God, the inherent dignity of the human person, the inalienable right of the freedom of the individual, and respect for the fundamental rights and freedoms and the rule of law, and further affirming that the people of Anguilla generally have expressed the desire to become a self-governing people and to exercise the highest degree of control over the affairs of their country at this stage of its development. So those were principles, so to speak, that underpin what flows from there. Okay, so moving on to taking a look at what constitutes an Anguillan, so Anguilla's status. Part 9 of the draft constitution provides for Anguilla's status to be determined, granted by Anguilla Status Commission on a number of criteria, including two of which I will highlight. One, that for a person that has been resident in Anguilla for a continuous period of at least 15 years. Two, is married to an Anguillan and has been married for at least 5 years. If we take a look at Part 7, powers and procedures in the House of Assembly. So the Constitution provides that for a speaker, and when the Assembly first meets after a general election or after the office of a speaker has fallen vacant for any other reason than the dissolution of the Assembly, the Assembly shall elect a person to be Speaker of the Assembly. And that the Speaker shall be elected from among persons qualified for election to the Assembly, but who are not members of the Cabinet. Traditionally, the Speaker has been chosen from someone who has been put forward by the government, and since the government of the day would carry the votes, then typically that person would be appointed. And there has been some suggestions that there should be a different way of choosing a speaker, and that person should be neutral in the sense that it's a person who's not aligned with any side. Also to note in this section, voting, in the occasion, and I suppose it can happen, that that is a tie in terms of votes cast. the speaker, any other member presiding as a speaker, should have the right to cast the exercise and vote. Representation in the House of Assembly, and this is an area which has generated quite a lot of discussion and comment. In part 6, and again, it's interesting to look back at, you would have mentioned Chief Minister Hugh's view. he seemed to have been quite satisfied with the size as it was then, except for changing, well, getting rid of the nominated members and having, yeah. So anyway, in the proposal is that currently there should be not less than 11 members, and it's proposed that this be increased to 13. Also of worth mentioning, and we saw that the last elections was conducted on that basis, there is now provision for 4 representatives in the House of Assembly to be elected on the basis of island-wide voting. There is also, as we know, 7 electoral districts. There is the proposal individual 9. There is distribution of voters across the districts. In some cases, it's quite skewed in that there we have a couple small districts, and we have about three large districts. We have District 6, which we are in tonight. That's one of the larger districts, and so the view is that either that that there should be a smoother distribution of voters across those districts. Alternatively, there's been the suggestion, as I said, that there should be two additional districts. So something to consider and take a decision on based on the feedback. There's also been proposed that there should be all the representatives in the House of Assembly should be elected on an island-wide basis. That having been said, in terms of comments and feedback, there is still on island there's still a strong attachment by folks to their particular electoral district. Whatever is decided in terms of district change, that would have to be done by way of a district boundary commission and whatever recommendations they would put forward. I would have mentioned earlier this question of the 2 ex officio members, the Attorney General and the Deputy Governor, and as I said, you will see from even going back to Mr. Hughes' comments, it's been a long time now where it's been proposed that these persons should, while they may be in the House of Assembly, they should not have a vote, and that this issue became apparent when the recent passage of the GST bill in July of this year. So why is it important to have good representation, or in terms of numbers in the House of Assembly? One of the primary reasons is to prevent the Executive Council, the will of what happens in Executive Council just becoming the will of the House of Assembly. In other words, you don't want to reduce the House of Assembly to being a rubber stamp. In terms of improving the standards in public life, there is a recommendation to have provisions for campaign finance for the very good reason that you want to have a level playing field for those who are involved or putting themselves forward. You don't want businesses or individuals, for example, to influence the outcome of the election through their contributions. So the view is that there should be stipulations as to what is acceptable in terms of the level of contributions and transparency, and in terms of who's contributing what. There's also been the recommendation that the Anguilla could benefit from having what they call institutions or individuals of good governance to provide, guardrails. And so there's the recommendation for a number of commissions. There are some commissions, but the recommendation for others, for example, that there should be a integrity commission, an appointments commission, the ability to have commissions of inquiry and so on. And in terms of commissioners, to have a complaints commissioner, a freedom of information commissioner, human rights commissioner, for example. And in terms of the freedom of information commissioner, say, good governance that works on the basis of, if you are to hold governments accountable, you need access to information, and so this would be a very important provision. There's also recommendations to have included in the Constitution section relating to public finance. Currently, there's not much in the Constitution on public finance. So responsibility to act to replace the current context of the borrowing guidelines so that the government should have a sustainable level of debt. And so there are provisions which state that the government should